Imagine standing night watch on the edge of the Judean desert. The temperature drops 30 degrees the moment the sun disappears. You're surrounded by the same jagged cliffs and dry wadis where, almost 2,000 years ago, 960 Jewish Zealots held out against the 10th Legion of Rome for 3 long years. Their final act, mass suicide rather than surrender, still echoes in the rocks above Masada. But this story isn't set on the mountaintop fortress itself. It's happening 20 kilometers west, at a modern Israeli Defense Forces training base called Salem. A sprawling, sun-blasted compound of concrete barracks, tank ranges, and razor wire fences. Thousands of soldiers cycle through every year. Most leave with sunburns and new calluses. A few leave with stories they swear they'll never tell again. Over the last decade, a pattern has emerged. Every soldier stationed in Barracks Block 7, known to locals as the Roman Wing, reports the same things. Boots marching in empty corridors at 0300. Latin commands barked in the dark. The smell of burning olive oil and pitch. And always, the sound of a single child crying just beyond the perimeter lights. The base historian will tell you that Salem was built directly on the ancient Roman supply route that fed the Siege of Masada. Legionaries once camped here, repaired siege engines here, buried their dead here. When the IDF leveled the ground in the 1980s, they found fragments of Roman armor, lead sling bullets stamped with the 10th Legion's boar emblem, and a mass grave containing over 200 skeletons, most with their wrists bound. What they didn't expect was that something would stay behind. Tonight we're going to hear 7 first-hand accounts from soldiers who served in Barracks Block 7 between 2018 and 2024. Every one of these men and women requested anonymity. Every one of them still wakes up checking corners for shadows that shouldn't be there. Chapter 1. The First Watch. My name is Sergeant First Class Avi Cohen. I was posted to Salem in late 2018 as a platoon sergeant for basic trainees. They assigned me to Barracks Block 7 because it had the newest AC units. I thought I'd lucked out. The first night on duty, I was walking the interior corridor between the 2 long wings. The lights were dimmed to red for night vision preservation. My boots echoed louder than they should in the empty hallway lined with rows of metal bunks and rucksacks hanging like ghosts from the footboards. The air smelled of fresh concrete and desert dust that never quite settles no matter how many times you sweep. Then I heard it, clear as if someone were standing right behind me. Legio Decima. At Signum. 10th Legion. To the standard. I spun around. Nothing. Just the red glow and the faint hum of the air conditioning. I told myself it was probably some trainee messing with a language app, practicing Latin for whatever reason kids do these things these days. I kept walking, checking doors, making sure everything was secure. 10 minutes later, I reached the latrine block at the far end of the corridor. The moment I pushed the door open, the smell hit me. Thick, oily smoke. The kind you get from a torch soaked in pitch and olive oil. It filled my lungs like I'd stepped back in time. There was no visible smoke, no haze, no fire alarm screaming. Just that heavy, ancient smell clinging to everything. And then the crying started. A child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, sobbing the way children do when they're completely lost. The sound bounced off the tiled walls and came from the last stall on the right. I drew my sidearm, moved forward slowly, clearing the room the way we're trained. I kicked open each stall door one by one. Empty, empty, empty. When I reached the last stall, the crying stopped instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. The stall was empty too. Just a toilet and a sink, and the faint outline of boot prints in the dust on the floor that definitely hadn't been there earlier. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence that felt heavier than the crying had. Then I reported it to the duty officer over the radio. Possible auditory disturbance in Block 7 latrine block. Smell of smoke, no source. Child crying, no visual. The duty officer sounded half asleep. Old pipes. Wine through the vents. Happens all the time in the older blocks. But Block 7 wasn't one of the older blocks. It was built in the 90s. The next night, I brought a small digital voice recorder. I set it on the windowsill at the end of the corridor where the red light didn't quite reach and walked my patrol again. Same route, same pace. When I got back to my office after shift, I played the recording. At first, it was just my footsteps, the occasional creak of the building settling. Then the Latin command came through, repeated 3 times, each repetition closer than the last, as if whoever was speaking was walking toward the microphone. Legio Decima, ad signum. And right at the end, faint but unmistakable, a woman's voice whispering in ancient Hebrew. Al tashkid odom. Do not destroy them. I played it back 5 times to be sure. I'm not religious, but I grew up hearing those words in synagogue. They're from Psalm 59, a plea for mercy. I didn't sleep much that day. The following morning I went to check on the trainee who slept in the bunk closest to that windowsill. I found him sitting on his bed fully dressed, boots laced, staring at the wall. His eyes were red, face pale, and he was crying quietly. When I asked what was wrong, he just kept repeating the same phrase over and over. They're waiting for the sun to rise so they can finish it. He couldn't explain what he meant. He didn't remember saying it later. Command medevaced him that afternoon for psychological evaluation. I put in a transfer request the same day. It was denied. They said I was needed for the next training cycle. I still have that recording saved on an encrypted drive. I've never played it for anyone else on base. Some things you keep to yourself when you're still wearing the uniform. But every time I close my eyes, I can still smell the pitch and hear that child crying in the dark, somewhere just beyond where the light reaches. And I know whatever started that first night in Block 7 wasn't finished with me yet. Chapter 2. The Shield Wall. My name is Corporal Maya Levy. I served in the Combat Intelligence Collection Corps and was posted to Tsalem for the full summer rotation in 2020. Block 7 was our home for 3 straight months while we supported night exercises on the tank ranges. We would roll in exhausted, covered in dust, stripped down to boots and underwear, and crash hard on those thin mattresses. One night I woke suddenly, heart already racing before I even knew why. The room was pitch black except for the faint red glow of the emergency exit signs. Every other bunk was empty. My squad had left hours earlier for a live fire drill, and I had been left behind on light duty with a twisted ankle that still throbbed when I put weight on it. Then I heard the sound that had yanked me out of sleep. Metal scraping against metal, deliberate and rhythmic, like shields being locked together edge to edge. It was coming from the corridor outside my door, steady as a heartbeat. I sat up slowly, reached for my rifle propped against the bunk frame, and chambered around as quietly as I could. The scraping grew louder, closer. Then came the boots, heavy, hobnailed, marching in perfect unison down the hallway. The cadence was unmistakable. I had heard it in training videos of Roman reenactments, but this was no recording. This was real. I eased the door open just enough to see. The corridor stretched empty under the red lights, but the floor was covered in a thin layer of fine red dust that definitely had not been there when we swept the block that evening. In the dust were fresh prints, square-toed sandals with hobnails, the distinctive pattern of Roman caligy. The trail led straight toward the far end of the wing, where an old underground water cistern had been sealed off decades ago. I followed the prints, rifle at low ready, boots silent on the concrete. The air grew colder with every step. The prints stopped abruptly at the heavy steel hatch that covered the cistern entrance. Someone, or something, had scratched 3 Hebrew letters into the concrete just above the hatch. Deep grooves, fresh, as if done with a combat knife. 30. Every Israeli knows that number. 30 days. The length of time the last Zealots held the Great Siege ramp after the Romans finally breached the wall at Masada. 30 days of desperate, hand-to-hand fighting before the final night. I stared at those letters until they seemed to burn into my eyes. When I finally stepped back, the dust was already shifting, blowing away in a wind I could not feel. Within seconds the floor was clean again, as if no one had ever walked there. I returned to my bunk. My rifle was gone. In its place, buried point down in the concrete floor like a grave marker, was a Roman gladius. Short, wide-bladed, iron darkened with age, but perfectly preserved. The handle was wrapped in wood and bone, worn smooth by centuries of use. I did not touch it. I sat on the edge of my bunk and stared at it until the sun came up and the rest of the squad returned. They saw the sword, went quiet, and no one said a word about it until I reported it to the company commander later that morning. He examined the blade without picking it up, face pale beneath his tan. Then he told me to wrap it in a towel, lock it in the armory safe, and never mention it again. His exact words were, "Some things found on this base stay found. Understand?" I understood. 2 nights later, the shields locked again. This time the sound was right outside my door. The scraping went on for minutes, slow and deliberate, as if an entire century was forming a testudo in the narrow hallway. I did not open the door. I sat with my back against the wall, rifle across my knees, and waited for dawn. When the sun finally rose, the corridor was empty. No dust. No prints. But every single bunk in the wing, including mine, had a small pile of red sand on the pillow. Exactly 30 grains on each. I counted them. I still have that gladius. It sits wrapped in cloth at the bottom of a footlocker I never open. Some nights I swear I can hear metal scraping metal, even when I am hundreds of kilometers away from the desert. And I still dream of that hatch, and the number scratched above it. Chapter 3. The Child in the Cistern. My name is Private First Class Daniel Katz. I was 19 years old, fresh out of basic training, and assigned to Salem in early 2021. It was my first real posting. They put me in Barracks Block 7 because every other block was overflowing with new conscripts. I didn't complain. The place looked clean, modern enough, and the air conditioning actually worked most of the time. My third night there I drew guard duty on the roof observation post. It was around 0200 hours. The desert night was cold, the kind of cold that seeps through your uniform and makes your fingers stiff even with gloves. I was scanning the perimeter fence line with my night vision goggles, sweeping slow arcs from the tank wash racks to the distant training hills. Everything was quiet. No movement. No heat signatures except the usual residual warmth from the day's vehicles. Then I saw it. A small figure standing near the old cistern hatch, maybe 30 meters from my position. Child-sized. White tunic that glowed faintly in the green phosphor of the NODs. Bare feet on the concrete. Perfectly still. Just standing there, looking straight up at me. I keyed the radio immediately. Tower to CP, this is Katz. I have possible civilian on the inner perimeter. Child, approximately 4 to 6 years old. White clothing, no shoes. Grid 03, near the sealed cistern. Over. The response came quick but calm. CP copies. Negative contacts on cameras. No civilians cleared for the compound tonight. Confirm visual and description. I adjusted the goggles, zoomed in. The child was still there, head tilted slightly, staring directly at my position even though the post was dark and elevated. No face details, just a small shape in white against the black desert floor. Confirmed visual. White tunic, bare feet, stationary. No adult escort visible. Roger. Hold position. Sending mobile patrol to check. I kept watching. Then a second figure appeared beside the child. Adult male. Short red tunic. Bronze helmet with a transverse crest running front to back. The classic silhouette of a Roman legionary centurion or optio. He wore segmented armor that caught the faint moonlight. He reached down and took the child's hand gently, like a father would. Both of them turned their faces up toward me at the same moment. My pulse hammered in my ears. I could feel the rifle stock slick against my palms. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The child raised one small hand and pointed directly at me. Not waving. Not gesturing. Pointing. The legionary nodded once. A single sharp motion. Then both of them turned and began to walk, slowly, deliberately, toward the cistern hatch. The hatch is a heavy steel plate, bolted from the outside with industrial padlocks and welded shut along the edges since the 80s. They didn't slow down. They didn't reach for the locks. They simply passed through the steel like it was mist. 1 second they were in front of it. The next second they were gone. I stayed frozen on the roof until the relief shift climbed the ladder at 0500. I didn't say anything to them. I just handed over the goggles, signed the log, and went straight to my bunk without reporting what I'd seen. I told myself I was tired, that the NODs had played tricks with shadows and heat mirages. I almost believed it. That afternoon a maintenance team rolled up to inspect the cistern for routine water table checks. They cut the padlocks, pried the hatch, and lowered a camera on a pole. When they pulled the footage later, the screen showed a dry stone chamber, empty except for dust and a few scattered pebbles. On the floor, perfectly centered in the beam of their light, lay a single child's sandal. Tiny, leather, Roman style, with cross straps and a small hobnail pattern on the sole. Next to it sat one silver denarius. The coin was clean, edges sharp. No patina of centuries. The obverse showed the laureate head of Vespasian. The reverse carried the legend, IEMP Ks Vespavi GPMTR PPPCOS III, minted in 73 AD. The maintenance sergeant who found it didn't say much. He just sealed the hatch again, welded it shut tighter than before, and logged the items into evidence as possible archaeological contamination. They never reopened the cistern after that. I still wake up some nights smelling dry stone and old leather. I still see that small hand pointing straight at me through the green glow of the goggles. And I still wonder what they were waiting for down there in the dark, because the way the child looked at me wasn't angry. It wasn't afraid. It was patient, like it knew I would eventually come down to join them. Chapter 4. The Ramp at Midnight. My name is Staff Sergeant Ronan Barrick. I was with the Armored Corps, running a company-level live fire exercise out of Salem in the summer of 2022. We spent the days pounding targets on the deep ranges. Came back to Block 7 at all hours covered in dust, sweat, and cordite residue that never quite washes off. The barracks became routine. Shower, chow, rack time, repeat. One night we rolled in late, around 0100. I took a quick shower to get the grit out of my hair, threw on PT shorts, and lay down on my bunk. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the AC and the occasional cough from someone down the row. I was out almost immediately. I woke suddenly. No idea how much time had passed. The first thing I registered was sound. Iron picks striking stone. Shovels scraping earth. The low grunts of men working in unison. It was steady, relentless, the kind of labor you feel in your chest more than here. Then came the creak of heavy wooden beams being levered into place, ropes straining under weight. I sat up. The room was empty. Every bunk stripped bare, sheets folded military tight, footlockers closed. My platoon had vanished. I checked my watch. 0230. No alert had gone out. No movement order. Just silence inside the building, and that impossible construction noise coming from the east wing. I grabbed my rifle, slipped on boots without lacing them, and moved down the corridor. The sound grew louder with every step. It was coming from behind the concrete retaining wall at the far end, the one the engineers poured years ago to stabilize the ground where the ancient Roman siege ramp once terminated. The base sits right on the old supply line. The ramp's footprint ends practically under that wall. I pressed my ear to the concrete. The noise was unmistakable now. Hundreds of men building something massive, rocks tumbling into place, earth being packed, a deep voice barking orders in Latin. Festinate. Sola rioter et finisserit. Hurry. The sun will rise and it will end. The wall began to vibrate under my palm. Fine dust sifted from the seams. Hairline cracks spider webbed outward, spreading fast. Then the entire surface bulged inward once hard, like a giant fist had struck it from the other side. A second bulge followed, slower, deliberate. The concrete groaned. Rebar creaked. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. I ran for the nearest fire alarm pull station and yanked it. Nothing. No klaxon. No strobes. No voice over the PA. Dead. I sprinted to the duty room. Empty. Desk phone dead. Radio silent. Every office, every common area, deserted. The entire block had been evacuated without a trace while I slept. I was alone with whatever was trying to push through that wall. I returned to the east wing, rifle up. The bulging had stopped. The cracks were sealing themselves before my eyes, dust filling the gaps like time running backward. The noise faded to a low murmur, then silence. When the sun came up a few hours later, the wall was flawless again. Smooth gray concrete. No sign anything had happened. But every bunk in the east wing, mine included, now had a Roman scutum leaning against the footboard. Large oval shields, painted red, reinforced with iron edging. The charging bore emblem of Legio X Fretensis stenciled in faded gold. 30 of them, one for each bed. Heavy. Real. The leather grips still supple, as if they had been oiled yesterday. The company returned at 0800 from wherever they had been redirected. They saw the shields, went dead quiet. No one touched them. The battalion commander arrived an hour later, took one look, and ordered the entire wing cleared for unscheduled maintenance. The shields were collected, crated, and removed by a team wearing gloves. I never saw them again. No one ever explained where my platoon had gone that night. No one ever asked me what I heard behind the wall. I still dream about it. The sound of picks and shovels never stops. Sometimes I wake up tasting dust in my mouth and feeling the ground shake under my bed. And I know they're still out there, on the other side of whatever thin barrier separates then from now, building that ramp one more time. Because the sun never rose for them on the morning they expected. Chapter 5. The final night. My name is Lieutenant Tamer Weiss. I was a military police investigator attached to the Southern Command in 2023. Command tasked me with looking into a string of unexplained incidents at Salem, mostly AWOL reports, psychological breakdowns, and equipment losses, all traced back to Barracks Block 7. Too many for coincidence. They wanted answers, quietly. I volunteered to spend 3 consecutive nights inside the block myself. No squad, no backup, just me, caught in an empty room at the end of the East Wing, body camera, audio recorders, and a thermal imager. I figured if something was happening, I would document it objectively and put the rumors to rest. Night 1 was uneventful. Normal building noises, wind rattling the windows, distant generators. I slept in shifts, reviewed footage at dawn. Nothing. Night 2 started the same. I was reviewing logs around 0340 when I heard crying again. This time inside my own room. Soft, muffled sobs of a small child, coming from the corner near the wardrobe. I turned on the overhead light immediately. The room was empty. No footprints. No temperature drop on the thermal. No shapes on the camera. But the crying continued for another 30 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it began. I checked the corridor, the latrines, the cistern hatch. Everything secure. I told myself it was audio bleed from the ventilation system. I almost believed it. Night 3 broke me. I awoke at exactly 0345. No alarm, no reason, just wide awake. The room was darker than it should have been. The red exit light had gone out. Then I heard singing. A woman's voice, low and gentle, singing a lullaby in ancient Hebrew. The melody was old, something my grandmother used to hum. But the words were clearer, slower, as if meant for me to understand. I followed the sound. It led me down the corridor, past the empty bunks, to the sealed cistern hatch. The heavy steel plate was cracked open just enough for a person to slip through. A thin line of absolute blackness beyond. I approached slowly, flashlight in one hand, sidearm in the other. The singing grew softer, more intimate, like it was coming from the bottom of the shaft. I aimed the beam down the concrete steps. At the bottom stood the child. Same white tunic, bare feet, hair dark and tangled, face pale but calm. Behind the child, lined against the far wall in perfect silence, stood at least 30 adults, men and women in simple wool robes, the kind worn in the Second Temple period. No weapons, no armor, just quiet, patient faces turned upward toward my light. They looked exhausted, but not afraid. Some held small bundles. One woman near the front had blood dried on her sleeve. All of them watched me without blinking. The woman who had been singing stepped forward. She was older, hair bound back, eyes sharp even in the shadows. She spoke in perfect modern Hebrew, accentless, as if she had grown up in Tel Aviv. We waited for the sun. It never came for us. Now it comes for you. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. She extended one hand toward the steps, palm up, inviting. The child took a single step forward and looked straight into my light. For the first time I saw the face clearly, small, solemn, eyes far older than any child should be. I felt the air change, thicken, like the desert heat had reversed and poured cold from the earth. My flashlight flickered. The thermal imager went black. The body camera shut off. I backed away, slammed the hatch shut with my shoulder, and spun the locking wheel until my hands bled. I dragged a metal bench over and wedged it against the handle for good measure. I did not sleep again that night. I sat in the duty room with every light on, rifle across my lap, until sunrise. I filed my official report the next morning. No footage, no evidence, just my written statement. Command read it, classified it immediately, and transferred me out of the Southern Command by the end of the week. They never asked follow-up questions. They never reopened the cistern. It has been welded shut since that night. Triple plates, industrial seams, painted over like it was never there. I still hear the lullaby sometimes, when the house is quiet. Soft, patient, always the same verse. And I still see those faces in the dark, waiting at the bottom of steps that no one is allowed to descend anymore. They never got their sunrise. And every time I close my eyes, I wonder if the next dawn that fails to come will be mine. Chapter 6. The Legion Returns. My name is Master Sergeant Yair Cohen, no relation to the others who served in Block 7 before me. I was the senior NCO for an infantry platoon running our final certification cycle at Salem in early 2024. Command had already decided to permanently close the wing after our rotation. Too many incidents, too much paperwork, too many quiet conversations behind closed doors. We were the last unit scheduled to sleep there. Our final night on base, we wrapped up a long night navigation exercise and got back to the block well after midnight. Everyone was bone tired. Boots came off in the corridor, rifles racked, bodies hitting bunks still in uniform. I took the duty NCO shift so the younger guys could get a full rack. I figured I would do one slow walkthrough, check the locks, then grab a few hours myself. I started my patrol down the main corridor. The building was dead quiet except for the usual hum of the ventilation and the faint tick of cooling metal. I reached the east wing, turned the corner toward the cistern hatch and stopped. Outside, beyond the windows that overlooked the tank range, I heard them forming up. At first it was just the soft clank of metal on metal, the way peeler rattle in their brackets when a column marches. Then came the unmistakable stomp of hobnailed boots on hard-packed earth. Hundreds of them moving in perfect step, shields locked, the low murmur of men breathing in unison. I moved to the nearest window and looked out into the moonlight. They were there. An entire Roman legion, or what was left of one, arrayed across the open ground in full parade order. Row upon row of segmented armor gleaming silver under the stars. Red cloaks hanging motionless despite the desert wind. Rectangular scuda held at perfect rest position. The bore of Legio X Fretensis painted fresh on every one. No heat shimmer. No dust kicked up by their feet. Just silent, perfect formation stretching from the perimeter fence all the way to the foot of the barracks. I counted 8 cohorts at least. Nearly 4,000 men, though I knew the 10th had been much smaller by the end of the siege. Maybe every soldier who ever fell on this ground had come back for this one moment. At the front stood the command group, the legate in muscled cuirass and horsehair plume, the primus pilus with his transverse crest and vine staff raised, Aquifer holding the eagle standard high, the gold catching moonlight like fire. They halted as one. Absolute silence fell across the range. Even the generators seemed to quiet. The primus pilus took one step forward, slammed the butt of his staff into the ground, and barked a single command that carried clear through the glass. Legio. Salutate. Every man in that formation snapped to attention. Shields rose to chest height. Right arms shot out in perfect salute, palms down, fingers extended. The Roman salute aimed directly at Barracks Block 7, directly at me. I could not move. I could not breathe. I stood there in the red glow of the corridor light, staring out at an army that had been dust for 2,000 years, and felt the weight of their gaze like a physical force. The salute held for 5 heartbeats. 10. Then the primus pilus dropped his staff. The entire formation lowered arms as one, and they were gone. Not faded, not marched away, simply no longer there. The range empty, moonlight unbroken, only the faint smell of oiled iron and sweat lingering in the air. I finished my patrol on autopilot. When I returned to the sleeping bays, every trace of Roman presence from the previous years had vanished. No gladi in the floor, no shields against the bunks, no coins or sandals or scratched letters on the cistern hatch. The building looked brand new, untouched, as if no one had ever suffered a sleepless night inside it. We turned in our linens the next morning, loaded the buses, and left Block 7 behind forever. The gates were chained, the power cut, the wing condemned. I have not been back to Salem since, but every soldier who ever slept in that block still carries the memory of that salute. We do not talk about it much. When we do, it is in quiet voices over coffee, late at night, when no one else is listening, because we know what it meant. They were not threatening us. They were acknowledging us. One army of the desert recognizing another. Chapter 7. The Watch That Never Ends. My name is Sergeant Major Eli Cohen, retired. I served as the base operations officer at Salem for the final 18 months before Barracks Block 7 was officially decommissioned in 2024. By then the stories had piled up for years. The voices, the artifacts, the soldiers who woke up crying or refused to enter certain corridors. Command finally decided enough was enough. They scheduled the wing for demolition once the last platoon cleared out. I was the last uniformed man required to sign the closure paperwork. Before the engineers arrived with their chains and warning tape, I requested permission to walk the block one final time. Alone. No escort. No cameras. Command approved it without question. They knew I had been there longer than most and had kept more secrets than anyone else. The building was already stripped. Bunks gone, lockers emptied, power disconnected. Sunlight slanted through dusty windows and painted long shadows across the bare concrete floors. My footsteps echoed too loud, like the place was listening. I walked the length of both wings slowly, touching the walls, remembering every report I had filed and every one I had quietly buried. I passed the spot where the gladius had appeared in the floor, the place where the shields had lined up like silent sentries, the retaining wall that had bulged inward that one night. Everything looked ordinary now, too ordinary. I saved the cistern hatch for last. The steel plate had been welded shut multiple times over the years, layers of beads stacked like scars. Someone had painted over the whole thing in desert tan, trying to make it disappear into the wall. I ran my fingers across the surface and felt the faint ridges of old scratches beneath the paint. Then I saw it. Fresh grooves, cut deep through the new paint, as if done only hours earlier with something harder than steel. 2 lines of lettering. First in crisp Latin capitals, Legio Ex Fretensis, and directly below, in Hebrew letters just as sharp, they are still here. I stood there a long time, hand resting on the cold metal. The building was silent, yet the silence felt full, like the held breath before a command. Then I heard the child. The crying started softly, far away, the same heartbroken sobs so many others had described. But this time it changed. The sobs slowed, broke, turned into something else. Laughter. Soft, relieved, almost joyful laughter. The kind a child makes when someone finally comes to find them after a long game of hide and seek. It echoed up from below the hatch, bright and clear, bouncing off stone walls that should have been empty. I did not try to open the hatch. I did not call out. I simply listened until the laughter faded into quiet. I walked out of Block 7 for the last time, locked the outer doors myself, and handed the keys to the demolition foreman. He asked if I wanted to stay for the teardown. I told him no. Some things are better left standing, even if no one ever enters them again. It has been almost a year since that day. I live in a quiet apartment in Beersheba now. Retired. Civilian clothes every day. No more duty rosters or midnight alerts. But every single night, at exactly 0345, I wake up. I hear boots marching in the hallway outside my bedroom door. Heavy, hobnailed, measured steps that pause right in front of my apartment before moving on. I hear Latin commands barked low, as if to keep from waking the neighbors. And I hear that child laughing, soft and close, like it is sitting at the foot of my bed. I do not get up anymore. I do not check the locks. I do not turn on the lights. I just lie there in the dark and listen, because I finally understand what the salute was about, what the laughter means. The watch has been passed. The Legion never left. They were waiting for someone to take their place, so they could finally rest. And now someone has. The sun never rose for them on that final morning in 73 AD. Now it rises every day for me. But the night still belongs to them. And I keep the watch until my own sunrise comes.